Say you're developing a Spring Boot application, you are implementing a payment gateway, and if there are implementations, so you have a payment gateway interface over here, and then you have your implementations of that. In this particular interface, if you see, you have the process payment and then the gateway. Now, if you see, there is an implementation of it where you're implementing those things, and then you're having another implementation for Stripe as well. Now, let's go to the controller. Now, we are making use of this particular payment gateway interface and trying to run that particular controller over here. Now, let's see what happens when we try to run this. Take a look at this. You will see on this particular field there is a no unique bean exception thrown over here. Now you see it says that for this particular payment controller it require a single bean, but it is getting two beans, and that two payment, that is PayPal gateway and the Stripe. So it is not able to understand which of this particular implementation it has to auto import over there. Now, in this video, we are going to discuss about the top 5 questions asked regarding this particular exception, and also there is an annotation called @primary and @qualifier. The questions would be around those, because if you go to any interview, you will see that there are questions around annotations of primary and the qualifier with respect to the bean definition. So this is a must preparation, because out of this particular 5, any questions can be asked in the interview, and you should be prepared for it. Watch this video till the end, because these are quite important. Let's discuss the first question. What is the primary purpose of the primary annotations in Spring Boot? Now, this annotations is used to indicate that there is a particular bean that should be given preference when there are multiple beans of the same types that is available for autowiring. Now, with respect to the primary purpose, in Spring Boot dependency injection mechanism, when you have multiple interfaces, or you have an interface which is a common type, and you have multiple implementation of that particular type, these are registered as a bean in the Spring application context. Now, this needs to know which particular implementation it has to inject when it is trying to auto-wire it. Now, if you don't specify any of this particular, which bean to be imported, then you will get a no unique bean definition exception, which we saw at the very first when we try to run this particular application. And the primary @primary is going to solve this particular ambiguity. Now it is designed in such a way that if there are multiple beans of the same type, then it will choose the primary candidate. Now when it encounters multiple beans which are of the same time, then it is going to be marked that particular bean as a primary, and it will automatically choose the primary bean if there is nothing been defined, then in that case of the auto wiring. Now @primary is one of the convenient way to have this particular default bean. Now when you have multiple candidates, then you can actually auto wire it. This is going to simplify your configuration, and also it is going to prevent your ambiguity errors over here. Now let's take an example of an payment gateway. Now you have an interface over here. You have this particular method written over here, and then whatever the implementation who is going to implement this particular interface, it has to implement those particular methods. Now we have defined one component. We are implementing that same interface over here, and you see I have overridden that particular method over here. I'm trying to write the implementation over here. Similarly, for credit card, it is written over here. Similarly, I have written for the PayPal payment gateway the same implementation, but one differentiation over here you see is that I have added @primary over here. Now, does this particular mean is that now this particular bean, if there are multiple beans, then in order to Spring to identify which bean should be considered as a primary or a default one, then that particular bean has to be marked as the primary over here. Now, in this case, when the Spring Boot application starts up, and it finds that there is an interface and there are two implementation, and which one to import, it has to be known, right? Because these are all both component, but it has to be imported to which one, that has to be known by it. Now in that case, this comes in a handy where you have to mark this particular primary over there, and it will be taken as a default value. Now where this is applicable, when you are using this particular survey annotation or the implementation into that particular, if one of your services. Now in this case, if you see there is a service over here, I am making use of this. I have not auto wire. I mean, auto wiring with the help of this particular constructor over here. Now you see here, this is the payment gateway, the interface which we have written. Now here you tell me, like, if I am not able to, if I'm not writing this primary, how it will identify which one, right? Because now there are two implementations. Now which will it will identify? Now this is where the primary comes in picture. So if you see, in this particular application, I'm trying to create the application context with that particular application, and then I'm trying to get that particular bean. Now in this way, it will try to get that order bean over here. It will try to initialize this, and then it will try to get that and process that. So this way, it making use of the primary, which is called the default way. Now if the interviewer asks you this particular question, you can answer and give this particular example, because primary is, you can actually, to remind yourself, you can mention that as in primary is going to be the default implementation. Now, what is the purpose of the qualifier? Now, there is another annotation which is in the similar in line with the at the rate primary. Now, this is used to disambiguate which bean to inject when there are multiple beans of the same types. Now, when you're doing the auto wiring. Now, while we discussed that there is a primary which is going to be the default one. Now, the qualifier is one thing which is going to be a little bit different, and it is going to be very specific about which bean to be you want to be injected in that. So this will give you the preference, or this will give you an option of what specific things you want. Instead of the default one, you can choose that I want this particular implementation to be taken care when this particular application or a logic has to be applied. So in that case, you are not applying the default logic, you are writing the specific logic of your own thing. So in that particular context, in that particular logic, whichever is applicable, it should be making use of it. In that case, this particular qualifier will be very handy. Now let's say I've taken a scenario that you have the same interface over here and several concrete implementation are there, and you want only that particular specific beans out of that particular implementation. Let's say you have 5 of them, but only out of 5, only one of them I want the implementation to be the specific one which have to be used up, and that is not the primary one, that is the specific one. Now the qualifier comes in handy over here. Without it, you typically you have seen that at the start of the video, I've shown you that there will be a no unique bean exception will be thrown, and your application will not work. Now qualifier is going to give you some unique name. You can define that is going to match with the name of that particular specific bean. Now when you have used this annotation along with the auto wire, it tells the Spring to inject that specific bean which is going to match that with this qualifier name. Now the same interface is what I have used it earlier, the payment gateway. Now I have this particular at the rate component. If you see here, I have defined this name over here, explicitly defining the bean name. Similar to this, I am trying to define the same name over here. Now if you see, now there is nothing change over here. Only in earlier case we had defined the primary in this case over here, but here I'm not writing the primary, I'm making use of the qualifier. Now you see here, there is an in the service implementation here, actually again how it will know that which one to auto wire it, right? Now then we have to specifically mention this using while you're trying to inject it. Now along with this at the rate auto wire, you will see there is an at the rate qualifier over here, which is the PayPal. So this is what the specific thing I wanted when I'm trying to deal with the order service. Now the application context and everything are same. So in this case, it will actually invoke that particular bean only. I hope I was able to explain you the difference of primary and the qualifier. Now interviewer might ask you, like, when and why we should be using the qualifier annotation in Spring Boot application. Now you need to be aware of at the rate qualifier in order to answer this. We already discussed the previous question, what is exactly the qualifier is. So it is going to solve your ambiguity when you're trying to you have multiple beans in your application, then you try to which one specifically you want the implementation that can be taken up. Now there is one more important thing you need to be aware of, that the qualifier is going to inject the specific bean that is not marked as a primary. Okay, So it is not going to be the primary one, it is going to be the qualifier one. Okay, so now in this case what will happen, it will override the precedence, or it will override whatever it was written earlier. Like let's say you have a primary written over there, but now at the auto wiring, actually when you're trying to inject over there, you have overridden it with the qualifier over there. So if there is one primary already existing on the annotation in one of that particular component, then this primary will be overridden by the at the rate qualifier. So that is one thing which, if an interviewer ask you what is the precedence, and like, what will win or what will lose, right? So in that case you can answer that, qualifier will be the one which will be overriding the primary. Now you can actually at the runtime select the qualifier. So this is going to be, while it is not a primary role which are using the different qualifier, now you can inject the different points over there. You can choose different implementation for different part of your application. So let's say you have certain logics implemented in a different section. Let's say we already discussed, like, in some portion you need stripe, in some portion you need credit card. So there is only a specific implementation you want over there, not all of them. Now here, let's say, we'll see the annotation over here. Now when to use this, we already discussed, we have to use this. Now we also, why to use this, we have to use this because in order to resolve the ambiguity, and also you want some very precise control over which specific bean I wanted to inject, because you have to manually decide, like, which one should be the qualifier instead of the primary one. So this is going to explicitly tell them, like, they inject this type of bean which is found in with this particular name over here. So in that case you can do that. So in this case, if you see the SMS service is there are two names which have been defined over here, and then in the implementation you see the service over here, it is asking for a bean name, that is twin silo over here, this one, and it is implementing. Now in this case it is only requesting this particular thing to be taken up as a part of that particular implementation. Now here you see, the while auto wiring, actually I'm taking the qualifier, and I wanted this particular implementation to be taken up at the component. So here it will only inject this particular into this particular service over here, and then it will call the SMS over here. So in this way it will achieve that, when to use this, or where to use it. Now what is the difference between them, let's discuss that. Now when you compare the features, the purpose we already discussed, that is it is going to be the primary, going to be the default choice, and qualifier is going to be the specific choice. Then the usage wise, you can place this particular bean definition either on the component or at the bean over there. Now this particular qualifier, this has to be at the auto wire or the constructor level or the field level when you're trying to do that. So you're trying to inject something, then in that place you can do this. Now a number of beans, now only one of this particular bean can be added as a primary. You cannot have multiple, but you can actually define multiple beans with the different qualifiers over there, with the specific names over there. Now that is what the difference. Now this is quite important. When you have to highlight this as a difference, make sure you answer this as well. Now the precedence, it will act as an, like, fallback if nothing is explicitly mentioned. So this you can think of as a backup plan, or like, you can mention as an specific default thing behavior. In that case it is going to take the precedence. But if you see override over here, the primary, if there is present, and also if you are trying to do a different specific implementation, it is going to override with that particular qualifier over there. Now this is going to resolve your ambiguity by providing the default. Now this is going to be, resolving your ambiguity with the exact specific match. So ambiguity resolution is working in a two different way for these two 3D annotations. Now the control level, how it is going to work when it comes to this. Now this is going to be the general one, but here if you see the qualifier, it is going to be the very specific, and it will give you much more control over there. Now we already discussed when to use this. We have common implementation, and you want that particular to be used at the most of the time if you have not defined it anything. then you can inject the specific one when in the particular logic wherever it is applicable. Now, what will happen if you have a multiple beans of the same type in the Spring context, and if you don't mention at the rate primary or at the rate qualifier also? Now, this is the same situation what at the very start of your application or the video I've shown you, that you will throw an exception, that is no unique bean exception will be thrown, because neither you have defined the primary, neither you have defined the qualifier. Now, Spring Boot will be in a dilemma to what to do in this case, and it will actually stop it, right? So this is going to try to auto-aware, but it will not be able to conclude that. This exception is going to be indicating that some Spring Boot has found more than two beans over there when you're trying to dependency inject. So that is going to be the deciding factor when you're trying to deal with this at the rate primary and at the rate qualifier. Now, how does the Spring resolve the ambiguity when you have multiple implementation or an if an interface or an parent? Now, this is quite important because this shows the internal how it is going to deal with it. And if you have proper understanding of this particular how internal it is going to work, that make sure you watch this very carefully. Now, Spring has got different strategies to resolve some ambiguity when it comes to multiple implementation. Now, if for a single bean, if it finds multiple beans while auto wiring, it is going to take this particular approaches, which are it is going to first check on the direct name matching. Now, if you have an let's say you're auto wiring a field or a parameter exactly, which is it is going to find the exact name of that particular bean. Let's say by default that is going to be the camel case, but explicitly you can given like in the component level you have given, at the red service level you can given, or at the bean level actually then you can given, but it will inject that particular with the name whatever it is going to match it. So first it will try to check this. Now if you have mentioned at the rate qualifier, then it is going to explicitly take this particular bean and inject it. Now this is going to look for the required type of that bean, and then it is going to check for the specific name of that particular bean, and that will take the precedence of if there is any other things mentioned over there. Then comes the primary. Now this is one of the multiple ways of marking it as a default implementation. So if you have not chosen anything, or if you want a default implementation to be chosen up, if there is nothing mentioned, then this is the annotations. So this will act as a fallback mechanism when there is nothing has mentioned over here. Now you can also use at the rate resources when you're trying auto wiring some specific. Now this is part of the JSR 250 annotation. Now this is again is the default injecting, it is going to be with the name of the first name over there. Then if it is not specified, then it is going to be taking the bean name. It is going to look for the same name of that particular field or the setter method whichever you have defined. If no match has been found for it, then it will go to the matching type over there. Then comes the collection. If you need to all the implementation of an implement interfaces, you can inject them into either of this particular list, okay? And this list interface will inject all the implementation of this particular interface into this collection. Now you see same is applicable for the map. This is going to be with the key and the value pair. Now that's all from this particular video. I hope I was able to explain you all the different set of questions which are asked with respect to these two primary annotations, that is at the rate primary and at the rate qualifier. Now if you are attending any interview, if you are preparing for a Spring Boot, then this video is quite helpful. Also, please share it with the people who are actually preparing for an interview. If this video has given you some value, please give a thumbs up for it. And also please don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell icon. You will find more such videos in my channel. Please check out my channel page where you will find more such relevant videos which will help you prepare for an interview, clear your concept with respect to the Java, Spring Boot, microservices, Kafka and AWS. So make sure you check out the YouTube channel page.